and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 24. I am your host, Robert Zombie, along with my assistant, John Guellen. How's it going, John?
Oh! Hey, I'm fine.
Yeah, that's our Treehouse of Terror episode. I think that's as much as I want to invest in that. I think we're gonna have sound. Yeah. I think we'll have sound effects when we go in, so it'll sound better in post. It'll be like
we're gonna fix it up in post.
We're gonna put some CGI in there, and
it's like J.J. Abrams. We're gonna fix it up in post.
Put some lens flares in it. Well, it's been kind of a slow news week after that huge news week.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna do some cleanup with some topics and get to some TV and comic book stuff.
We got some topics to talk about today.
Yeah. Thank everybody for listening to last week's episode. That was as what they call in the business an all-day sucker. Had some good downloads. Sorry, my notes are beeping at me. I have noticed this, and I'll address this now, that we have been getting a listener in the last few weeks from the People's Republic of China in the Beijing area, and I will just say, and I'm probably going to do this wrong, Shia for listening, and if you are engaged in the show and it's something that you want to talk about, hey, drop us an email. Tell us. I don't know if marketing is over there right now. If that's something that, if I don't actually know when the Force Awakens opens in China, but if you're listening to this and you have any kind of insight about what Star Wars is, how it's viewed over there in China, we'd love to hear from you. And you can send us an email at talkingbirdcast@gmail.com, and we'd appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think we had any. I don't think there's really any news, like news. Like,
yeah, I mean, I guess right after we recorded, our huge, massive poster and trailer reaction episode last week. I guess it was revealed that John Williams did not actually write or record the music for the trailer. And then I guess someone talked to J.J. Abrams again about the production schedule for Force Awakens, but that's, in terms of like new news, that's been it. I mean, we've got comic books coming out every week. We have Rebels now every week. Some other stuff that we'll get to in this episode, but I guess, I mean, that's probably a good place to start, is just to follow up on last week's episode.
Well, yeah, I guess maybe I didn't read that clearly enough. So none of that was his. I thought it was kind of like a remix situation.
I mean, it might have been. I guess it first came out that, I mean, obviously, it had the Force theme and it had Han and Leia's theme. So John Williams wrote it in that sense. But I guess right after we recorded, either that night or the next day, even. It came out that, like, oh, this guy did the music for the second half of the trailer. And then later it's like, oh, and here's the guy who did the music for the first half. And neither of them were John Williams.
That is just, that is so weird.
So one of them at least has done, it looks like a lot of his business, or a lot of his, what he does is music specifically for movie trailers. And I know in the past for the prequels, I think John Williams, they recorded music specifically for the trailers. They didn't just, edit together music from the full score and do it that way. So it's not, my guess is that it's not that unusual. At least, and certainly it's probably not that unusual today, in contemporary movie making and movie promotion and marketing. I guess the surprise comes in because, John Williams is, he still works with pencil and paper and, sitting at the piano and writing these things out. And so we have this image of the way the music is put together as being this, classic older style of how these things are done. So, that must also carry over into, how these are done for the trailers and everything. And it sounds like that's not really the case anymore. That you have sort of John Williams working on the music for the full film. And then, okay, well, we need to put these trailers together. We need some music. While he's working on that, we'll just tap someone to take care of the trailer for us.
Yeah, I mean, part of me is kind of disappointed. Which, I mean, I guess if I think about it, the way, like, even like with stuff like, Lord of the Rings, which was, Howard Shore got a lot of kudos for his score on those 3 Lord of the Rings movies, which I think, were great. But I think if you look, say, like the Two Towers, they would use that that Requiem for a Dream. That I forget what the piece is called, but it's from Requiem from a Dream, and it's in every movie now when they show like something like, oh, our heroes are going to come up against something that they might not be able to defeat, or I guess I just don't ever think about that in Star Wars terms. I always think it's like, oh, there's such a it's such a formula, and they made such a big deal about bringing John Williams back, and so maybe it's just a consequence of like they have to market we have to rebrand these movies to the planet, kind of, and there's really no margin for error. So if it's like oh, I'm just gonna go with something that's very typical Star Wars, and maybe, I don't know, it makes me wonder if, like, did he even have a say? It was one of these things where he gave them something and they opted not to use it. It's the same kind of which I guess we can call my Drew Struzan conspiracy theories about why he didn't do the actual theatrical poster.
Yeah.
It's that idea is like, well, oh, well, it's good, but it's not, we're marketing to the entire planet good,
Yeah. I mean, I guess it may just come down to, the marketing department was in charge of these things, and that's why you have different departments in a organization as huge as Lucasfilm, let alone Disney. And it's, so the marketing department has its folks that it uses for these sorts of things, and those may or may not be the folks that are involved in making the thing itself, right? Or the posters or the artwork or the music or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's probably a consequence of kind of moving at this fast pace. I mean, we are essentially, well, we have three Star Wars movies in production. I mean, I guess The Force Awakens is not, I don't think it's been locked. I mean, is that, I don't know.
No, so yeah, I mean, and this ties into, as I mentioned, there was that interview with J.J. Abrams, or I don't even think it was an interview. It was like he was on the red carpet for something. He was at some event and someone asked him about it. And he said, I mean, they're still working on the visual effects. He says, so here's the exact quote. The visual effects process goes on for so long that my guess is we'll probably be doing visual effects for the next 3 or 4 weeks, even though the cut will be done before then. We're in the editing room working on the cut, going over visual effects and going reviews. And we still have another scoring session with John Williams. So they don't even have the cut yet. I mean, we've been told a running time. So I don't know if they're cutting the movie to that running time or if that's just an approximation. My guess would be the latter, but, right. So they're just tweaking it for the final edit. And then even once, that edit is done, there are still some placeholder scenes that, okay, well then the visual effects will go here, that they'll be working on until the end of November, it sounds like, just a couple weeks before the film is released. And John Williams hasn't even finished scoring the movie. They haven't, or he's finished scoring it, but they haven't finished recording the score for it. So, that'll all depend on, as what the final cut looks like and what the visual effects will look like. So yeah, and as you say, there are still 3 Star Wars films in production right now, which is kind of a weird thing to say.
Yeah. It's like that idea that it was the originals were done in over that 3-year period, and they were crafted, and there wasn't really a lot of talk about where things were at certain points. I know that Rick McCallum was always, cryptic about stuff. He would just go, we're doing those reshoots. And of course we had already scheduled these reshoots, so they all knew, it's that idea that like, that's not indicative of having a problem with the movie. It was something pre-scheduled, and because people think reshoots now, and they think of, they didn't it's World War Z where they had to reshoot the last third of the movie, or
right.
Fantastic Four. I will say one last thing about this that it just occurred to me that, so, it comes out, that poster comes out, they don't really talk about who does it, and then we find out it's not Drew Struzan, and then we kind of make peace with that. Then the trailer comes out, and then it's like, we're pontificating on John Williams, and it's not John Williams, and I'm not embarrassed by that, because for every intent and purposes, we would assume that if we were hearing a new score, it'd be John Williams. So I'm not embarrassed by it. But didn't they really kind of goose up the fact that John Williams had been involved in recording new music for the first teaser? Wasn't that wasn't that the thing that they were going, yeah, there's new John Williams music in that? And
possibly. I don't know if that was like the Lucasfilm folks saying that, or if that was
or
if it was just people saying like, oh, it's a new recording, meaning they didn't just take music from the original trilogy and import it. But I don't know if that. I would assume that Williams would be there for those recordings, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's just funny. I guess maybe I remember that wrong, because I think if they had made a big deal out of like, oh, we got John Williams back. I mean, John Williams came in and worked personally on the teaser to make it perfect, musically speaking, and then they ditch him for the actual like trailer, which will be the the main point of entry for people for the next 2 months. It's kind of, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know if I'm making grand assumptions about how Disney, markets movies. I don't know if they literally have people, invited into, conference rooms with a TV and notepads and like, how do you feel about this? And, is it 1 through 5? But I guess when you pay $4.2 billion for something, you don't want to leave it up. You don't want to leave it all up to nostalgia.
Yeah. And I mean, so the thing I would say is, I do feel, knowing that it wasn't John Williams who did the music for the trailer, I feel a little bit better about that kind of plinky piano in the beginning, or at least I can still talk myself into that not being part of the actual score. 'Cause like, it's fine. It does its job, but it's, as we talked about last week, it's very overdone. And so my hope is that the actual score doesn't have that kind of sort of cliched gesture in it.
It's like the idea. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just like, I kind of made peace with it, and like, oh, okay, well, this is their, new regime, new idea, and I make peace with it. And then you find out like, oh no, that's just for the trailer, and like, oh, it's gonna go back to that, that kind of that romantic, Dr. Zhivago type music. Instead of,
right.
Plinky treated piano, like the soundtrack to the Firm or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I will say too, so I was listening to some of the other scores the last couple of days, and I mean, in The Empire Strikes Back, Williams does have these kind of, piano notes, or, just kind of pounding them out or plinking them out, but usually they're done with the full orchestra in the background, and they're there more as sort of like color, or because he likes the sound of the cellos and someone just pressing one piano key really hard. Like, he just it's for the color of it. It's not necessarily for the effect of those plinky piano notes. And so I mean, so it is possible that he'll go back to similar kinds of effects in this movie, and bring those in and incorporate those with all the other different kind of gestures and effects orchestral effects that he's employed in the 6 movies now. So I do want to say, like, yeah, it's still possible that that could be part of the score, or at least a similar kind of thing as part of the score that the folks who did the trailer sort of borrowed from. But yeah, I do feel a little more comfortable now. It's like, oh, okay, this isn't right. This isn't going to be John Williams just trying to sound like whatever other
Hans Zimmer,
whatever other scores are out there. You know, he's still probably going to try to give us, you know, what he does.
Yeah, another podcast had kind of pointed a lot, really right at the Hans Zimmer's Man of Steel soundtrack, which kind of had a lot of the... If you think about the trailers for that, I think there was a lot of like plinky piano type stuff in that, which I think made it to the final film. It was just... I think people are kind of, at least older fans, it seems like, are kind of more like, ugh, really? We're in the plinky piano territory, and
right.
It's like, well, I guess I made peace with it, but if it's not that, then I'm kind of happy. And it's like, because I think it would be I think it might be a mistake to rely too heavily on a contemporary score. I mean, Star Wars is never gonna, you know, knock on wood, that they're never gonna, you know, throw in a, you know, and whatever, you know, like some contemporary artist's song or something, you know, like a theme from...
Right, it's not going to be like James Bond or wherever, where you have a score, but then you also have like a theme song, or, you know, you have, you know, in the middle of the score, then you have a song by, you know, Chris Cornell or something to...
Yeah, I mean...
To punctuate the emotion of a certain...
Now that I say that, I think I just jinxed myself into, like, about 6 months down the road, there'll be, you know, the Music Awakens of, you know, a Disney... songs in tribute to the Force Awakens. It's like how they, you know, when Tron Legacy came out, which, you know, Daft Punk did that kind of half electronic, half symphonic score... But I actually really enjoyed that. I thought it was totally appropriate for the movie. But then, like, right afterwards, then they like, we're gonna have all these electronic artists remix it, and then, you know, that was when I was like, ugh, really? I think I gave it a cursory listen and then moved on.
Yeah, you know, One Direction singing Yub Nub, or
yeah,
you know, what is it? The Mormon Tabernacle Choir doing the Duel of the Fates.
Oh man, you're killing me. I think I'm just like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, what could be worse? And then it happens. Because like we were saying before we started recording, that, you know, we are the key. Well, you are the key ticket buying demographic, but we're getting a little. I'm way out of it.
That's right. I am basically the average ticket buyer for this movie. We found out this week.
Yeah, it's kind of like
age, race, gender. Yeah, it's all pretty much there.
It's hilarious. It's like
me. I don't know.
Somebody had made a comment, and I'm paraphrasing from this Birth Movies Death article about this phenomenon. Just the idea that maybe that there'll be a bunch of, like, you know, kids on Christmas break heading to the movie theater, only to find out that, like, there's no tickets,
right?
Because they've been, like, every nerd guy has bought tickets for the entire Christmas break. I'm going 5 times. I'm going 6. And they're like, I only got 2 weeks off from school.
I mean, I could see that happening.
I'll just download.
That would be unfortunate. And, like, you know, I am the average ticket buyer, but I don't want to be. I don't want to be in a theater with, you know, people who are just like me, right? I want to be in a theater full of all kinds of folks.
Yeah, do you like
Star Wars is for everyone?
Well, do you like for an event like that? Do you kind of like a raucous crowd?
Actually, no, I don't. I was
going to say
I don't ever. I very rarely, if ever, appreciate a raucous crowd. Like, yeah, maybe cheer. Like, I appreciate the raucous crowd. You know, the opening notes of the main title theme, but then once we start getting the crawl, everyone needs to shut the hell up.
Exactly.
Like, until the movie is over. I just find it so distracting. And I know, I know that means that I'm a killjoy or a wet blanket or whatever, but I don't care. Like and this is true of all movies, not just Star Wars, but once action is happening on the screen or people are delivering dialogue, like no, that's what everyone is supposed to be paying attention to.
Exactly. I mean, that's kind of how I feel. I mean, I definitely have a grumpy attitude towards it. And I actually have to kind of remind myself to just relax and have fun, because it's like, I'm not being tested at the end of this movie. But
no, I know.
But
I was like, I want to experience all parts of the movie. I don't want to miss something, because it's sort of it's like talking in a movie theater, but on a larger scale.
Right.
And
that's the thing. It's like, well, when I picked my theater, I didn't get the theater I wanted at first, because it's the Cinerama, which is like the premier, it's owned by Paul Allen of Microsoft fame. And he spent a ton. It got renovated around the time of the special editions. So it came out and was really nice and all this stuff. And of course it was up for another upgrade. So you go in there and they have you can have assigned seats, so you know where you're going to be sitting, so you can show up whenever you want. He has a sci-fi museum and quite a personal collection of sci-fi memorabilia. So you go in and it's like, Admiral Ozzel's uniform from The Empire Strikes Back, and Jenny Agutters, costume from Logan's Run, and an X-wing pilot's costume. So I mean, it's like a great experience. But unfortunately, I got a suburban mall situation, close. It's actually going to be easier to get there, because it's like parking downtown is a nightmare. But it's like I've had some bad experiences at this theater with people that just don't understand how to experience a movie. And to be perfectly honest, it mostly is around the baby boomer generation.
Right.
Which, like, people think, oh no, it's 17-year-old, kids that just don't have manners. Like, no, it's people my mother's age that come into a movie and just think that you can ask questions during it. So anyway, I'm getting off onto we can have plenty of time to complain about theater etiquette over the next 2 weeks. We are here to talk about some non-movie media.
Yeah, so we have Rebels. We have a couple episodes of Rebels we can catch up on, and then we have multiple weeks worth of comics we'll catch up on, and then I have read the short stories that came out in that Rise of the Empire bind up. And so I'll talk about those later. But I guess you want to start with Rebels, since that is sort of closest to.
So yeah, they've been on for. It's been gone on. This has been on for 2 weeks now. We've been back for 2 weeks from the Midsummer movie of the week or whatever, the Siege at Lothal with Darth Vader. And did they really introduce anybody? Because they'd already introduced Ahsoka Tano at the end of season 1. So
in the Siege of Lothal, I mean, I guess they introduced, the other, whoever is in charge of that A-Wing squadron and the, Corellian cruisers. I can't remember his name, but no one who's like a major character, really.
Yeah, so now I forget. Now I'm back.
So we have 2 episodes. The first one is The Lost Commanders. The second one is Relics of the Old Republic. And really, these are parts 2 and 3 to, they form a full story along with the Siege of Lothal, to the extent that, The Lost Commander basically starts right in the middle of a scene, essentially. The one of the final scenes in Siege of Lothal. So it starts right in the middle. They're already talking about, okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to keep fighting the Empire. Are we going to just, help deliver food to refugees from the Empire, or are we going to take on the big boys? And if they decide that they are, and so they need help, and so Ahsoka says, I know some people who might be able to help. Sends them to this planet where they meet 3 former clone troopers, Rex, Gregor, and Wolf, I think, right?
Yeah.
So just to sum up both episodes, so they meet them. Of course, Kanan, as we learned in his comic book, which we'll talk about later, he was a Padawan who saw his master be killed by clone troopers in Order 66, and so he is very distrustful of clones. And so one of the big parts of this story, or at least the latter 2/3 of this full story, is him sort of confronting those feelings and him learning to trust the clones, and the clones sort of being like, oh, good, we've always wanted Jedi, they were at first they were afraid that the Jedi were there to take their revenge, and then they were like, "Oh, well, we're used to taking orders from Jedi. This feels right."
Like I was born to do it.
Yeah. So then in the Lost Commanders, it essentially turns into a Jaws homage, and I could never really tell, or it took me a while to tell. I don't think it's an ice planet. It's called Celis. I don't think it's an ice planet. I think it's just rock.
Right.
That they're doing this in, but it seems like it should be ice. I mean, they're essentially going ice fishing, but just without any ice.
Right.
And so it turns into this Jaws homage where they're all, the clone troopers are there essentially fishing for these huge dune sandworms, but in the rock. And which is something that Clone Wars used to do a lot, where they would, invariably there would be one or two episodes a season that were homages to a movie, either The Seven Samurai or another Kurosawa movie, or something like that. We can get into some of the little details if you want, but
yeah.
I think and I haven't done this yet. I haven't watched Siege of Lothal and then Lost Commanders and Relics of the Old Republic back to back to back, and I think it probably I liked these episodes okay, but I think it would probably be better if I watched them all as one arc, because Lost Commanders, it just like kind of starts, as I said, in the middle of a scene, and it's not really and then at the end there's a to be continued for them to get to the Relics of the Old Republic, so it's not even like a self-contained story. But if for someone, let's say, who hadn't been watching Rebels and they heard all about, oh, Rebels is such a good show, it's such a good show, it starts tonight, and then they just sat down to watch this episode without much maybe they've seen a few episodes from season 1, but without much other context, like I don't know that this episode really would have meant anything. And so that I thought it was, it's sort of nitpicking, but it's like,
Yeah, no, there's definitely an element of, almost an extreme element of fan service. I mean, we're dealing with 2 characters, 4 characters. I kind of tend to think the clones as being like just one character. That kind of...
Yeah, and I mean, that's the other thing about these episodes, too, is that I feel like a lot of the reaction to them has, people saying they've loved these episodes, and it's been mostly people who love them because they loved the Clone Wars and like, oh, we get to see the clones again and Ahsoka and they hug and whatever. And like, as someone who didn't, the Clone Wars I didn't think was that great, but people like it, that's fine. I'm not taking that away. But for me personally, like going back to those characters and sort of bringing the Clone Wars back into it is not something that I care about all that much.
Yeah,
so the episodes are fine for what they are, but I feel like a lot of people like them for reasons that are outside the bounds of just these episodes, and it's like that part I don't care that much about.
Yeah, it's that idea that where it's like, there's in fandom where there's always, and I don't even think the word contrarian is appropriate, but I can't think of anything better. This idea that like, oh well, whatever, the prequels weren't that great, but I'm really into like Clone Wars. That was my jam or something like that.
Right.
And that's that
was my entry. That was my version of the original trilogy. The older generation had, the original trilogy, but I have the Clone Wars.
Yeah, it's just this, there's not a lot of, if you're just kind of coming in, either you've kind of checked out for a while, for decade or whatever, and you're just wanting to dip your feet back in. There's an awful lot of baggage that you're having to like to pick up in this episode, and just being like, a lot of the beats don't mean as much, even to me, where it's like you go, oh, they're working out their differences, or they're, referring back, Ezra, and I'm jumping ahead to the second episode, is like, he makes this thing like, oh, they like to fight in the Clone Wars, and it's just like this kind of stuff where it's just, I don't know, it just felt like it was kind of like it's kind of almost like a bottle episode done in a, or a, like in Star Trek, they'd have an episode in like the first season and be some passing thing, and then like in the fifth season, something that happened and they would come home to roost, and it would really reward you if you were a person who had watched every episode of, Star Trek: The Next Generation. But if you were just like, you'd come in and pop in here and there, you'd be completely lost at the importance of it, I guess. And it sets the tone really weird when we're just kind of, there's people are splitting off, and I don't know. I guess it just, some of it worked for me, and some of it just did not. It was just, I guess is what my point.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I thought the relics of the Old Republic worked a lot better.
Yeah.
For me, I mean, there were some parts of the Lost Commanders that I enjoyed and that I appreciated. I mean, animation wise, there were, to the extent that you have like camera movement in animation when you're just drawing essentially the camera movement. But I thought there were some really nice, sort of camera moves. So one of the clones, Wolf, and we're spoiling these episodes for people, but I assume most people who are listening to this have either seen it or
don't care
that we're explaining it. One of the clones, I think it's Wolf, has a history of like sending out false, incident reports to the Empire, but this one he says, oh, some Jedi showed up, and Agent Callus, who's been in there since episode 1, he sort of takes it seriously, and he sends a probe there. And so once he does that, then it cuts back to the planet and where the clones live, which is this kind of, I think we've mentioned this before. It's this old Republic walker, this old Republic transport. I'm not even sure what you would call it.
I forget the name.
But it's made to look more like Howl's Moving Castle, where you just have all this junk sort of hanging off the side and platforms added to it just to make it sort of a more permanent space for them. And so it cuts right back to there, and it starts at the very front of the thing, and then the camera kind of swings back around to the rear of it, where Kanan is standing in the Phantom that's parked on the top rear of this thing. And it's just all kind of one move to sort of give you a sense of where they are, and then the scope and the size of this walker, and then back to, okay, so now I know where this character is in relation to everyone else. And it was really well done. So I like that. And then the sound design on the show, I think, is really good. In this Lost Commanders episode, when the crew of the Ghost, so Hera's kind of off on her own, and she's sidelined a little bit, particularly in this episode, a little bit less so in Relics of the Old Republic, but definitely in this episode, where she doesn't go down to the planet because she and Chopper have to stay and fix the ship or something. That is what it is. I don't know why I said introduced uncertainty into it. So they're fixing the ship, and so it's Kanan, Ezra, Zeb, and Sabine who go down to Sealis. And, they show up, and they use this old tactical droid, I think it's called, from the Clone Wars to find these clone troopers.
Which they don't know. Which at the time they don't know.
It's just a number. They're just hearing a number. But, they show up at this walker, and it's quiet, and they're not really sure who's there. And you just kind of hear the sounds of the wind and the wind chimes, and that they've attached to this Howl's Moving Walker thing, and there are just all these kind of ambient sounds, and I don't know if it's the tones of the wind chimes, but there's something about it that really reminded me of A New Hope when Obi-Wan Kenobi shows up to save Luke after he got attacked by the Tusken Raiders, and you know, he introduces himself as like, "Oh, you're Ben Kenobi," and it's like, "Oh, the droid, he's looking for Obi-Wan Kenobi."
Oh yeah, and the transition.
Alec, and it goes the harp. It goes like doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, or it's flutes actually, and it goes like doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo.
Yeah, and all of a sudden it's like
doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. And it's this kind of, oh, that's interesting. Like, who is this person? And so it's sort of I got a kind of a similar sense of that moment. So, you know, the animation on the show, I think, is mostly very good. Some of the micro movements, like that, what they do with the characters' hands and then their eyes and facial expressions, I think can be a little rough or overdone and distracting. Right? It's like they're trying to get these characters to act subtly and react to these things. It just doesn't come across as subtle as it's probably supposed to. And I think that's probably a function of the 3D aspect of it. But, you know, other than that, I think the animation is really good. And the music and the sound design is really well done too. And I'll talk a little bit more about the music when we get to the next episode. But what did you have to...
Well, you know, it just occurred to me because it's like that you know, that moving castle analogy about the troop transport, and I was thinking, and it's like, oh, you know, it kept on putting me in the mind something, and it's like, oh, it's a little bit, you know, like I've never seen the moving castle, but I've seen pictures of it, so I know what you're talking about. But then I also thought about John Carter of Mars, that was a whole thing. There was a subplot in those books about the cities would move. And they were on legs or tracks or whatever. But the funny thing is with the chimes and the big old you know, whales type thing strapped to the side, it actually reminded me, and this is hilarious. Is have you ever seen Waterworld?
No.
So there's that Kevin Costner's basically he's a merman,
right?
And he's on this kind of weird pontoon boat, and it has a lot of like crap around his thing that chimes to entertain him because he's by himself most of the time. And at one point he takes on two people to further the plot, and he kills like this whale thing that he ends up strapping to the deck and cooking. So it was kind of like, I kept thinking, I was like, God, this really reminds me of something familiar. And I realized it's like Waterworld, but you know, that's neither here nor there. The first episode, I have to be honest, is like, I'm not really thinking of any great. The only thing is that I would think the whole concept of, you know, this is obviously a conceit for drama, so I guess it kind of has to be there, but would it really have killed Ahsoka Tano to just say, hey, other than just like, you know, you're going to have to trust these guys, just trust them. Why don't she just say, she should have said, hey, not to freak you out or anything, these guys are clones. But I trust them with my life, and you should trust them too. And you know, I guess you don't want to take away the kind of like, oh, we're going to have this great conflict in the second act where, you know, Kanan gets and goes, hey, I don't want to, you know, that whole idea. So yeah, you are kind of blunting the drama by having that, but there is a kind of stretch in reality where it's like, well, wouldn't she have said, because you never know, it's like she could have said, oh,
hey, I know some, you know, I was friends with these clone troopers. If they're still around, they would know where all of these bases are.
Well, also, like, it's like the whole idea that what if, you know, they get there and the guy comes out and like Kanan just freaks out and cuts the dude's head off, you know? Oh, we're going to get killed.
Right.
Because I don't know if they know about this. I don't know. Does everybody know about the biologic chip that the clones had, and that those three guys had?
I guess not. I did. I mean, again, since I wasn't the biggest Clone Wars fan, I haven't watched every episode of the Clone Wars, and so I didn't even know that was.
I would say that it's worth it to go back to the Netflix the original Netflix
the
series,
season 6 or whatever.
the season 6. A lot of that stuff there's a whole subplot about Rex discovering that there's somebody's chip goes bad before the Order 66, and it becomes this whole like weird medical drama thing. And what's the like the 3 days of the Condor kind of thing, where they stumble upon a conspiracy, and then that's kind of how they end up where they're at. It's kind of an interesting kind of it's kind of well done, because it kind of it's a good way of them kind of saying like, hey, it's a way of them not having to say, oh, every clone that you made in the 5 seasons have grown to like, they're all bad now, which I think is you kind of you can depress your viewers, because they spent this time getting emotionally bonded to these characters, and then like, oh, they're all bad now. Every guy you see in
I'm sure the episodes are well done. That whole idea of like, oh, it's because there's a chip in their head, like that reason for Order 66 being like, I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know that I'm in love with that idea. I'll put it that way.
I think Karen Traviss, she may have her way of dealing with it was that was literally like, it was a standing order kind of idea.
Right. It was like Order 65 is in the event that the Chancellor has committed treason, then they're supposed to arrest the Chancellor. Order 66 is in the event that the Jedi have committed treason. It was just like one of a number of, like you said, standing field orders or whatever, and that I thought was fine.
It's a kind of idea.
Yeah, like, oh, it's just a chip in their head. Like, but if they're clones, why wouldn't they have just made it some part of their like biological makeup?
Well, I think that's I think that's kind of what they. I mean, I think
part of their education. Make it some kind of, have it ingrained to them through their education as clones, rather than like, oh, in addition to cloning them, we also found the time to put a chip in their head somehow. I don't. It's not. So, like I said, I'm sure those episodes on Netflix are well done. I may watch them. I don't love that idea, and I'm not. It didn't ruin the episode for me or anything like that. It's just like, really, that's what they came up with, that there's just a chip in their heads.
Well, that's the funny thing. It's like, you get in this idea that like, what determines the Force, and then you have to deal with the midichlorian thing with Lucas. But then they always try to, retcon it out. So I think it's going to be one of those sticking points where, like, nobody will ever really want to. People will never really be satisfied with Order 66 the same way they're never going to be satisfied with the concept. Is the Force something that you're sensitive to? Can you be taught? Is it because of some mystical thing, or is it because of you can get a blood test? It's. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of those inherent problems in Star Wars when they cross over medias, and they I think the movies, they paint in such huge strokes that kind of stuff is like, makes perfect sense. Like, oh, it's time to do Order 66 all along. It's like they didn't have the clones, except in a couple brief instances, like when Obi-Wan was on. What's the whole planet? Where does he fight General Grievous? On that planet, he's got Commander Cody, I think, where he talks to Utapau, and he talks to Commander Cody, and you realize that they have a rapport, which is, that's not something that's shown in any other part of the movie, and I think that's a lot of the TV show keys off of that, like, oh, they had friendships and they had relationships, and why would, like, it becomes that thing where it's like, well, if they had friendships and they had relationships, if they were stuck in a trench somewhere for 3 weeks, you don't think that one of them, it might be an instance where he'd be like, oh, it's a shame that if you guys ever betrayed us, we'd have to kill you all. He'd be like, what?
Right.
Oh, let's Order 66. Right. What are you talking about? You're supposed to be loyal to us. Where I think that the conception of the clone trooper in the movies was really that they're just essentially cannon fodder, and that the Jedi didn't get particularly connected to them because they were merely an extension of their mission. It's not a thing where it's like, where people befriend them. And I mean, I know that's canon now, but I think that's one of those situations where things are going to have to be viewed in like movie level canon and then TV level canon.
Yeah, I mean, and we haven't seen any indications that the Lucasfilm group is going to like touch that prequel era, or even way before, prior 1,000 years before the end events of A New Hope, right? We other than the young Han Solo movie, but I think that's only tangentially going to touch on the stories we got in the prequels. So we have no real indication that they're going to spend a lot of time focusing on in that era and intertwining with those stories. And a lot of people say, oh, it's because there's this stigma of the prequels. And I think there's a certain element of truth to that, because, these movies, they're not just marketing them to like the diehard Star Wars fans for whom the prequel era is their favorite era of Star Wars, right? Like it's not even just Star Wars fans. It has to be that slice of Star Wars fans, that section of Star Wars. They have to market these movies to everyone. And so for the casual fan who, as we keep referencing, is sort of mythic casual, fan, or at least this casual moviegoer, like all they're going to remember is like, oh yeah, the prequels weren't very good, right? So why would I go see another movie about this? Right. So I think there's something to that, to there being a stigma, and that being why they're not touching this era yet. But I think another part of it is that, Lucas himself, but then also the people following Lucas who have had to deal with this era, like they've just kind of made a hash of this, with the midichlorians, like you said, and now with this like chips in their heads about order. It's at a certain point, this story of how the Republic or the clone troopers came to betray their Jedi or not, or how this whole story of who the Jedi are and why they were betrayed, and did they bring it on themselves? Were they too arrogant, or was it because there were just chips in the clones? Like at a certain point, it becomes impenetrable, and like they're in trying to retcon and in trying to either explain or explain away some of Lucas's choices, whether you agree with the decisions to explain away those choices or not. Like the fact is that they're doing that on some level, and it just becomes a wash, and you're left with just this like tangled mess of explanations for why these things happened. And so so that's why it's like this chip in the head. I mean, part of why I didn't love that idea is because just the fact of it, like, oh, it's just a chip in their head. But then also it's like, ugh, do we really need to like complicate this even more than it really was, initially? And
it all smacks of something that, would appear in a role-playing book.
Right.
Or an encyclopedia of the Star Wars universe kind of stuff that would be like kind of one of those things where you're like, oh, it's never referenced in the movie, but some writer had fun, writing the backstory of what Order 66 was. In some ways, it might have just been better if they had just kept it in the dark and just have this idea, that nobody knows why people are Jedis, or Order 66 is, we don't know. Was it a chip? I mean, is it a post-hypnotic suggestion? It's that kind of idea that you can just, also if you get into like just the practicalities of it, if, through all the thousands or supposedly millions of clone troopers, they never did an autopsy, then found this, this weird thing in their head or whatever, it's like,
right.
I mean, there was one of the clone trooper books or whatever, the Karen Travis ones, I think, or maybe it was the MedStar series, where they basically the way they treated, the way that the army or the Jedi treated the clone troopers is kind of like they were like Legos almost. Like if you got a, if your arm got blown off, they just took another dead clone trooper's arm off and put it on, and it was like,
that was probably the MedStar series. I think in Karen Travis's books they got cybernetic implants or sort of like what Luke's hand in Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah,
right? They give them like robot legs,
and that's kind of funny because if you think about the dichotomy of it, is that so she treated them kind of like she gave them personalities. She gave them that kind of the conception of how they would be treated in battle, where and really that kind of made her end up running afoul of Lucasfilm of they weren't happy with that kind of idea. I think they liked that idea that they were just cannon fodder, that they, it's that whole problem. Like they had to figure out in 98, 99, like how do we have a battle and not have, get a PG-13 or an R rating because people are getting, shot by the thousands. Like, oh, let's make them robots. And we won't and we just won't show many Gungans getting killed. They show some. But it's just like we're just they can cut, they can all this fun lightsaber stuff and they can cut right through them. But then it's all of a sudden it's like, if you're cutting through people, then it becomes the MPAA's got issues about it.
Right. So that was the other quibble I had with the Lost Commanders episode is right. So it's a similar idea where. Or maybe not a similar idea, but right. So the crew of the Ghost shows up, and they figure out that these people that Ahsoka sent them to, that they're clones, and Ken goes, "They're clones," and he gets out his lightsaber, and one of them's like, "Oh, they're Jedi. They're back for revenge," and so the clones are just as distrustful of Kanan as he is of them. Except Rex, Captain Rex is like, no, troopers, like, that's over now. He's not here to kill us. Like, we don't have any quarrels with, we have no reason to be afraid of them. And Gregor, like, immediately is like, oh, you're right. And then that's fine for the rest of the episode, right? So just that, because they had to put all this in 22 minutes and they had to get on with this story, that process of Kanan and the clones coming to appreciate each other. I mean, for Kanan, it lasted into Relics of the Old Republic, right? And he was just kind of mopey the whole episode, and then even into Relics of the Old Republic, where he was just kind of mopey. He was like, "They're clones. They killed my master.
Yeah,
they killed all these Jedi. They're cloned." But on the clone side, it was just like, "Oh, okay. We have no reason to be afraid of them. Great." Let's move on.
It's like the idea that, if we were thinking like, well, not the B story, but the subtext of this twofer is that, Kanan, even because his Jedi training was interrupted, so he's not really a full Jedi. So maybe he didn't learn some of that higher echelon stuff about interpersonal relationships or whatever. But I mean, if the subtext of this story is about, Kanan overcoming his own bigotry about people, it's not a very good examination of that. It's the kind of, it's his whole learning experience. Like, well, they didn't betray us, so therefore my opinion now changes.
Right.
That kind of, it's not like a thing where it's like he starts to see them as people, and that just because some clone killed his master on some planet, that these people are not. They all have names and they have personalities. At least that's the way they've set it up in the cartoons. He never seemed to actually. He only began to trust them because it was expedient for him to trust them.
Right.
I mean, and maybe the one thing I did like, and it was kind of I made a note of it. Let me go see what my note actually says. But I guess it's going to take too long to find it. I did like this idea. I think I've talked about this before. There was an earlier episode. I think they were. It was kind of like a protocol droid Clone Wars thing, and I think Gaviscon or something, which I think is also an antacid. But he's like this little alien guy, and it's like a 3-episode arc on Clone Wars with protocol droids, and this guy is so small he can actually sit in one of the domes of the protocol droids.
Mm-hmm.
There's this whole plot where they come across to town and they realize that this guy is a clone trooper that has amnesia and he doesn't realize who he is, and then they pump him, this Gaviscon guy pumps him full of the idea of, the Republic, you've got to defend the Republic, and at the end he dies defending as the droids escape. And it's this kind of thing where it's like, oh, a noble trooper, and I always kind of call bullshit on that, because this idea that okay, so that's their whole lot in life is to die. He essentially gets used as cannon fodder. They pull him. They pump this guy full of the jingoistic ideas for their own ends that they will die to protect them. And I always think it's like that's kind of a weird message to be giving up, because it's like the characters always say, "Oh, the Republic, the Republic, the Republic." And, they never really, even in this cartoon where they have all this time, they never really show us why the Republic is important to the average person. It's like, it's like the Republic is kind of like code for, the way things have always been. We have to defend the way things have always been. And because, and this, like, the Trade Federation, they want to come in and, what do they want to do? Do they want to, they want to have tariffs, or they want to, they want to do their thing. Anyway, my point is that, maybe I'm jumping ahead. There is a subplot at the end of this episode where the 3 clones are in a kind of they're in a battle with these Imperial walkers, and they just they basically say, hey, we're going to stay here and we're going to cover your escape, and essentially die. And we're like, okay, that's what clones do. But then, like, Ezra, and this is the first time he's actually said anything's come out of his mouth that I actually liked. Just that idea that he questions that. Why do they have to die? Why can't we just take them with us? Why can't we all battle together? And I honestly, I kind of really like that, because it's that time-honored tradition. It's like we pick on the young people a lot, because it's like, oh, they do things differently. Oh, that's not the way I do it. They don't respect the things that I respect when I was their age. And we give them a lot of shit for that. But this is like one of those interesting things where it's like, it reminds you that sometimes, young people, really what they offer that you can never get when you're older is fresh eyes on a situation. Because this might be the first time they've ever had to come up against this. And they just merely ask, it's like, why do we do it this way? Why is it that we only ever do it one way? And to me, that kind of, I like that a lot in this episode, because it did rebuke this idea that if they're going to go in the TV show, if they're going to think that clones are people and they have a destiny or whatever, or soul or whatever, they have other than just fighting. It was a nice. I felt like it was a nice way they kind of rebuked that earlier episode, and that the idea clones are not just a screwdriver at the bottom of the toolkit that you use, and it's like, well, if the head breaks off of it, it's no big deal. Because I honestly was pretty much convinced that this episode was another one of these noble end episodes where they were all gonna, whatever the name of the little shuttle is escaping, and they're getting blown up, and like, it was a pleasure fighting with you, and then they die. That kind of ridiculous concept of the war movie that we had in the 40s and 50s, that that every soldier was like, dying for the cause, and they were perfectly happy because it's my time, kind of thing. And I really like that idea that they actually rebuke that and come back and realize that these guys who are probably, biologically 60-year-old men or whatever actually have something to add. Who knows how much it'll be in the subsequent episodes, if they're just going to, they're going to kind of write them off and they're going to go help the Republic in their own way. But I like that.
Yeah, and as I said, I liked that second episode or the third episode rather, Relics of the Old Republic a lot better. I thought the action, I mean, it just felt a little more consequential, right? Because like, yeah, the Lost Commanders was fine for sort of getting these characters together and starting to learn to trust one another. But it didn't really pay off until the Relics of the Old Republic, when they were actually had to fight against the Empire, and Kanan had to think about like, okay, well, yeah, I might have left these guys here when to keep fishing, but now they're not going to be able to have that life anymore, that retirement anymore, and so. Yeah, if I'm going to be a leader, my job is one of the ways, or part of my job as a leader is to make sure that I don't leave these people behind if I'm in a position to help them, right? So yeah, I thought this episode was a lot more effective in sort of closing that circle or getting that across. I mean, because we've been talking, or I've been saying that it's of a piece with that first Siege of Lothal episode, which, I mean, these two episodes don't really reference it that much, other than it's just continuing immediately after the events of Siege of Lothal. But I mean, when you think about that episode, and even at the very beginning of the Lost Commanders, Kanan was like, "Look, I did not sign up for this. I did not sign up for another war. I'm not doing that again. I just want to." Find some people in need and help them by getting them food or helping smuggle stuff in order to get money to help them somehow that way. And so this is at the end of the Relics of the Old Republic is basically him sort of realizing that, like, yeah, because of who he is, he can't really operate that way, even though he might want to. Or that might be his, the impulses that he had to develop running from the Empire after Order 66, right? He has to tamp down those impulses and go and start thinking sort of the way he did a little bit when he was trained as a Jedi. So yeah, I thought this episode, it actually this is where the Lost Commanders actually did pay off. That the Lost Commanders episode was like, yeah, that was okay. Right, great. They caught a fish, and they shot a probe droid. That's about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I also thought there was a lot of fun little stuff in this episode. There's a brief thing where Hera has a communicator. The old episode 4 style. The one hitter thing looks like a one hitter. It's
right.
It looks like a couple rubber gaskets over a piece of nylon with a little bit of mesh. C-3PO grabs it in the control room on the Death Star, and you can see a close up of it. And she, even though it's animated, she still has she has one of those. That's how she's using. Also, just what terrible shots the stormtroopers have, like in the TIE fighter.
Oh yeah,
I kind of like that consistency. It's, even though it's like part of you just kind of shakes your head and it's like, aren't these guys military? But it shows that there is an interesting dichotomy in the way that stormtroopers and clone troopers are not. We always assume that they're just an evolution of one, which we knew they aren't. I think we figured that they're not clones, and it's conscription or whatever. But there's this kind of that utter contempt that the old clone troopers have for these guys. It's like, just that.
Yeah,
they don't actually even.
Right. We were trained, like, this is what we do, and we were bred and trained to be the best. Whereas the stormtroopers, it's just like anyone they pick up off the street who wants to do it.
And I like that because it goes to show you, it kind of sets up in a so subtle way of, the eventual downfall of the Empire, because it's It's like the and not to draw too close of an analogy because I'm by no means an expert. It's like the idea of like that kind of war, the Cold War, of the idea. Well, it just got to be financially, it became such a burden to keep up. A fully, like, they couldn't afford to, like. I mean, I guess there's some subplot that the Camino clone tanks or whatever are destroyed, and so that's why there's no more clones or something, which makes me, makes me hard to believe that technology is like some loss to the galaxy or whatever. It's the idea that, we had in the Zahn trilogy, it was the Sparty cylinders that they,
right,
would keep stored in the back or whatever. They would come across a few and like, oh, we can copy these and we can make, clone troopers. But yeah, I just like the idea that, you can tell that the Empire is cutting corners. They have to build these capital ships. They have to have operations throughout the galaxy. And it's not like, it's just not enough to like say, well, we're taking all the money because we're the boss and we're going to run everything because we're evil. It's just this idea that like, oh, there's some bureaucrat in the Imperial Senate at the time going, it's like, if it's like, you think I'm going to take this budget to, whoever the second guy in command of the Emperor is? It's like, no, we're going to shave off some, we're going to cut back on the pay and, which will demoralize the troops. Therefore, they're not really as invested in shooting. Maybe we'll not serve them as good a food or something like that. So basically, the Empire is like kind of starting almost in 10 years after its conception, is starting to erode from within anyway, because you can see that like these TIE fighter guys aren't even good shots. It's kind of like, and it's a lot of like petty bureaucrats with, axes to grind with people. It's like, that Callus guy, I mean, they try to set him up as kind of a mastermind, but really he's always kind of a buffoon. He's just really good at not getting blamed for stuff going wrong.
Yeah, and the thing is, so this episode ends with, Callus's, so the sends a probe droid. He confirms that there are the Jedi there, so they send a Star Destroyer. They drop 3 AT-ATs onto the planet, and then there's a sandstorm, and so our heroes are trapped between the sandstorm on one side and the AT-ATs on the other. And so the AT-AT that Agent Callus is in ends up getting destroyed, and he escapes on a speeder bike.
Right.
But then the Star Destroyer leaves because it was told that they had to rendezvous with Darth Vader, and it turns out to be one of the Inquisitors. But so if the Star Destroyer leaves, does that mean Agent Callus is just like stuck on that planet now? Like, I wonder if that's the last we're going to see of him. Like, unless he comes up with some other way of getting off that planet, like he just kind of drove off into the sunset. And I wonder, since they're going to spend more time with the Inquisitors now, I guess that is a possibility. Since I remember that I think Filoni at one point said that we were going to get or someone said it, we were going to get an episode where we learn more about Zeb and his planet and his people. And since Agent Callus was part of, the destruction of his people, then Callus will probably still be around for that dramatic element. But this certainly, you wouldn't necessarily be. This episode didn't do anything to dissuade people from thinking that, like, oh, so maybe Callus is just like stuck on this planet now.
I guess that's a possibility. I always assumed that they would just come back and pick him up, but
yeah, I guess that's the answer. But it seems yeah.
Yeah, he's like he's one of those guys that he doesn't inspire any kind of like when you're watching a show and you're into something and then somebody shows up and all of a sudden the anxiety kicks in, like, oh, something bad's going to happen. He's just not a bad enough. Just kind of there. He's like a middleman. Yeah, he's like, and he's in those sideburns, and he has a helmet that matches his sideburns, and to me that's like he's an over-engineered character. They have like real facial hair issues on this show. Between Kanan's, early 90s barista goatee and ponytail.
Yeah. I mean, there were some really interesting musical moments in this episode too. Right, so the moment with the AT-ATs coming down and seeing them in the distance was clearly meant to be a callback to the Battle of Hoth, and there were a lot of musical callbacks or musical interpolations of pieces of the Empire Strikes Back score. So when you see the AT-ATs, when they start firing, you get the kind of piano, right? So you get that. When Ezra is manning the gun on that walker thing, you get what sounds to me like a slowed down version of music from Empire Strikes Back. I couldn't quite place exactly where it is. I think it's part of when on Bespin around the time that Darth Vader or I guess Lando has betrayed them. Darth Vader already has Han and kryptonite, but they're escaping and Lando is getting Lobot to help, but they're trying to get to Boba Fett's ship in time to save Han, and they don't. There's a little bit of music around that part of the movie that I think is that this moment with Ezra at the gun is reminiscent of. I don't know why Kevin Kiner, the composer for Rebels, I don't know why he would pick that moment from Empire Strikes Back, other than maybe it just sounded good. Then so after they get out of the sandstorm, there's the cellos play this music cue that's from right at the beginning of the Battle of Hoth. So this is sort of the end of this battle, or towards the end of this battle on Sealess, but it's from right after Leia debriefs the speeder pilots, and the one guy goes, "To everyone to your stations, let's go," and then they cut to the outside. And it actually shows up a couple earlier times in the score, but it's that like da 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 da. And then there's another moment from the Empire Strikes Back score that, and I forgot to write down where it was. But in the Empire Strikes Back, it's like a syncopated. It's on the upbeats. It's on the offbeats, and in this episode of Rebels, he sort of puts it on the beat instead. And so, yeah, I mean, it's visually you get, clearly this call back to the Battle of Hoth, but then the music kind of reinforces that feeling of like the Empire Strikes Back, Battle of Hoth, and all these other moments. And so I thought, it was a good job of, not hitting them too hard, because they're not just using the John Williams score for these shows. Kevin Kiner is taking them and interpreting them and interpolating them in different ways and weaving them in and out with, sort of his own original music that are themselves kind of riffs on the Star Wars scores. But, just kind of touch on these moments and then move into, the whatever Kiner added to it. And so I thought that worked really, really well. I noticed it more in this episode than I did in the Lost Commanders.
Yeah, I think they were able to kind of, because I mean that's the problem with the walkers, which was reiterated when I was playing my Battlefront demo, is that if you think about the physics of the walkers, they're not particularly fast moving things. Mm-hmm. So how do you amp up this anxiety? Like they're getting closer, and I think the music, bringing back that music and kind of chopping it up a little bit to try to kind of fill in that, kind of put that forward motion. I think it was really effective. And then they mix it up with the idea of them fighting in an obscured battlefield. And yeah, I just think it was really well done. It was like, they do the touchstone of the person picking up the binoculars, and it's the same. It's almost the exact same shot from Empire. I mean, you have 3 walkers, which I think there was 3 walkers at the Battle of Hoth.
Yeah.
mean, they're really trying to evoke that time, but then they had a very different kind of idea of what the battle was. I mean, wasn't a redo of the Battle of Hoth. They're not really trying to defend or repel I guess they were trying to evacuate. But yeah, I think that I forget this guy's name, but yeah, he did a really good job on the music. I mean, like I said, I really felt that, minor problems aside, I thought it was the action was very effective.
Yeah, no, and the animation on the sandstorm itself was great, and what was going on beneath and underneath the sandstorm, and then also there's this really great shot when they swing back in the Phantom to rescue the clone troopers, when their walker is getting beaten down by this AT-AT. So when they swing back around, it's Kanan and Ezra and Zeb, I think, just sort of drop down from the back of the Phantom onto the top of that. And it's this great shot because you see them kind of jump out of the Phantom, but then it just they hang there in the air for a while until they land, and it's the way it was done is really, really good. So the action sequences in this were really good. The one of the quibbles I have with this episode is then, finally at the end we get back to Hera and Chopper, and I think they're making Chopper's dialogue a little too realistic, or like actual words and like actual human or humanoid vocal inflections, because especially he gave this long sigh, and it was like right. What droid would know to make that noise as a reaction, as an exasperated reaction? So I just think they're making Chopper maybe a little too anthropomorphic now, but
yeah, it's like that.
It is what it is.
It's like that problem when they, when they almost kind of make R2-D2 in some animations, like the Droids cartoon and stuff like that. That he would actually his body could expand and contract, like he was pushing his chest out, and that kind of anthropomorphic. Yeah, you know what I mean,
right?
When it's kind of it takes you out of it. It kind of does, and I wonder if maybe that's because, maybe that's the house style is moving towards these droids being slightly more talkative. It's like that idea, is BB-8, if BB-8 is supposed to be the new kind of the new R2-D2, then where's the new C-3PO? Because it makes me wonder if maybe that they're going to try to do a hybrid, it's C-3PO and R2-D2 in one droid. It's it's got the cute kind of stoutness of a protocol of a astromech droid with the kind of communication abilities. Well, maybe not fully articulated sentences, but pretty much telegraphing the emotion of the situation through sound effects and slightly phonetic sounds that are very similar. You'll be able to kind of figure it out even more so. It makes me wonder if since we've not really, unless Princess Leia's that weird blue droid is going to be kind of the new C-3PO type. It's kind of makes me wonder if they're kind of maybe changing, maybe they're doing a droid voice upgrade for these new movies, and this is kind of our first taste of that.
Yeah. So then at the end, Rex and the other clones, but mostly Rex, were reunited with Ahsoka, which leads me with an interesting question of, so now what happens with these clone troopers? And I can't remember if they addressed it in the episode now. Now I'm worried that there was a line where they said, well, we're going to go find another planet to go fishing on, and I just missed it.
I don't think so.
But it would be interesting to me if now, because Ahsoka was like, oh, I can't go with you. You know, there are these questions about who essentially Darth Vader is that I need answers to. So it'd be interesting to me if now the clone troopers sort of became her own personal little bodyguards and went around with her as she investigated who Darth Vader is. And then, you know, it was a way to sort of keep them in this era and in this show and add even to that kind of relationship and to that investigation. That would be interesting to me, but it's sort of left open what is going to happen to these clones now.
Yeah, I bet that it's probably on the table, and so that's probably they don't want to like box. You don't want to paint themselves in a corner.
I mean, I'm sure we'll find out in the next couple of weeks, but
exactly,
they may put that to the side for the moment. Yeah, so that's I think that's a good place to move on to the comics. Talked about Rebels for a while, so there are 5 comics that are either currently going on or just ended, and have been going on since the last time we talked about the comics, which was a while ago.
Yeah.
So let's start with Shattered Empire, because this is one that I think maybe the first issue had come out the last time we talked about it, but then it's wrapped up now. So Shattered Empire is essentially about Poe Dameron's mother, Shara Bey. His father, Cass Dameron, is in there briefly here and there. But it's really Shara Bey sort of going on these different missions to show sort of all of the work that the Rebel Alliance still has to do even after the Battle of Endor. And so one of those missions is that she goes to Naboo with Leia. She's like Leia's personal pilot to Naboo. I can't even remember why, honestly. But I don't even think it matters why, right? Exactly. So they get to Naboo. Leia at this point, I don't think knows that that's where her mother is from.
No.
There is, was it in the Leia comic? There was some point where she sees like a statue or a painting of Amidala, and it like winks at her or something, or it like turns to look at her. It's like a vision, obviously.
Oh, I must have missed that.
I don't think it was in Shattered Empire, but I can't remember where it was.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Or maybe, I can't remember which series that was in. Anyway, so at Naboo, they end up. So what happens is one of the big new developments of what the story is post Endor is the Emperor put this thing called Operation Cinder into place, where upon his death, a certain number, it's like a handful of planets, were ordered to be completely destroyed. One of which was Naboo, which of course Palpatine used to serve as a senator. And so to do that, a bunch of Star Destroyers and other ships show up. They send out these satellites in the atmosphere over this planet, and which causes hurricanes, lightning storms all over the place, basically just ruining this planet. Using weather to destroy the planet. So Shara and Leia and the Queen of Naboo then have to find some way off the planet. They have to find some way to destroy these satellites in order to save Naboo. So they go to the hangar where the Naboo starfighters from Episode 1 are, and when they get there, Leia has this vision of Darth Maul. It's just this, like, she senses the presence of Darth Maul there. And so like I said, Shara, Leia, and I can't remember her name, the current in Shattered Empire, Queen of Naboo, fly the starfighters. They take out the satellites, and they finally take out the satellites. As they're doing that, Cass Dameron is with Han Solo and other commanders. They're at an ISB base somewhere else. They get more information about what the Empire is up to, and they find about Operation Cinder. So they send Lando, a Nine Numb, and a strike force to Naboo to chase off the Imperials. And at this point, I mean, it's I thought they're kind of running into the same problem as the Leia and Lando. Kind of, we'll talk about Lando in a bit, but where there were only 4 issues, and so they had at this point this was now we're current up to like issue 3, and so they only had 1 issue left to, or I guess that was, or maybe it was 2, but they didn't have much space to resolve whatever was happening on Naboo, resolve whatever was happening with Kess, and then, wrap everything up. And so they didn't actually resolve what was happening with Kess. We just find out later, like, oh, he sacked out. Like that was the last thing we see of Kess, is him finding more information. And the other part of that is because there are so few issues for the storyline, like it never felt to me at any point like any of our heroes were in any real danger. Right. So even when they were flying these Naboo starfighters and trying to take out these satellites, and Shara's ship got hit, and she was worried that she wasn't going to make it. And of course she has this, husband and a baby, and she's like, oh, don't, I don't know what's going to happen to me. Right. Like of course she's going to survive this. Like it was never a question that she wasn't. And then sure enough, like 2 panels later, everything's fine. And so it's, I don't know. So after that, the last issue, plot wise, there's not a ton to talk about. Shara goes with Luke to infiltrate an ISB base, which has something where we're first told that it's something that the Emperor stole many years ago. And it turns out to be remnants of the tree that grew in the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Luke takes one with him. Shara gets the other. And she goes home with Kess to Yavin 4. They live there now, and she plants the tree on Yavin 4. But again, right, they're infiltrating this base, and it never felt like there was going to be any question of it going wrong. Like, of course this is going to work out, maybe not perfectly because they're found out and their identities are, uncovered, but like they still get what they wanted and they get out of there. And so I like Shattered Empire a lot. It's probably either my favorite or maybe second favorite of this new Marvel era of Star Wars comics. But it's, we're being told in these comics and in other media that, the Empire is not going quietly. It's a tough fight, for the rebels, and it's a long, hard battle to topple the Empire once and for all. But at least in Shattered Empire, like everything looks like it goes according to plan, and like it happens pretty quickly, and like, yeah, we need to infiltrate this base. Great, done. Right. We need to take out these satellites. Okay, that'll take maybe 4 panels, or that'll take a page in a comic book, and then it's done. And Lando and Nine Numb show up, and we kind of didn't really need them anyway. So it seems sort of at odds with the broader story that we're being fed by the Lucasfilm people, that like, oh, it's this really tough fight. And it's like, well, it doesn't seem that tough in Shattered Empire. So yeah, that was really my only quibble with it.
I'm not as big a fan of this as you were. I think that, to tell a good story, even with a limited stuff, it's like you kind of have to have some kind of growth or something within the story.
Yeah. None of the characters really arc.
You're right. There's no arcs. Having one of, either her or Dameron's, maybe die. I'm not a huge fan of people dying and stuff. It's not like the only way we can have a good story is if somebody dies. But there is a kind of there was this build up, this idea that, we're fighting on the same side, but in separate places, and we're coming up against it and all this stuff. And I really want to go home. It's just like, to me, it's the idea that they actually both get home. It actually is kind of underwhelming. Mm-hmm. And I don't really understand the idea that if we're thinking essentially this is within 2 or 3 weeks of the Battle of Endor, that they're actually allowing military to stand down. Mm-hmm. This idea that we have an entire battle to fight, but you guys can stand down. because you have a kid or something like that.
Right.
You know, they were actually operating at this level of competency where they were entering situations that, you know, they were winning stuff. There's nobody died, nobody lost. They achieved their mission. Why would the rebellion, you know, allow them to be like, you know, I'd love for you guys to go to Yavin and build your house, but no, we really need to keep you guys, you know, because we have this and this and this and this and the other thing. It's like it's kind of like it's a remnant of Aftermath. That this idea that, you know, there's all this lip service of Mon Mothma, like we have to, you know, reduce the size of our military and all this kind of idea. We have to start giving, you know, control back to the planets and on this kind of, like, I don't honestly feel like that rings true so early on in this assessment of the post-Emperor galaxy. It's like they're kind of, it's like the storytelling is kind of like cutting off its nose despite its face. It's this idea where like they're trying to, I don't know what their point is, because it's, unless they're going to bring them back or something, saying like, I know we said you could quit, but we're coming back for you. That kind of idea for one last mission. I mean, the name of the series is Star Wars. If there's, you know, I think that Lucasfilm,
multiple wars.
Yeah, Lucasfilm the Disney-fied Lucasfilm got smart in the early storytelling, realizing like we can't just have the Empire be gone or whatever. We have to have a substitute, because this movie is called Star Wars, and if there's no wars going on, it becomes like kind of like the prequels, which the wars don't really start until, you know, the last third of the second movie and ends at the very beginning of the third. So I just, there's something very hollow and very, I mean, I guess what's that term that they say when someone kind of, is it the Mary Sue, when somebody writes themselves into a story, usually a sci-fi thing, and it's like they're all of a sudden, like, this person you've never heard about is there and they're super important to it. And I feel like that's kind of what we're getting here. And it's like, okay, so they have this, you know, they had kind of, you know, Oscar Isaac had kind of let it slip that's like that he envisioned this idea that he'd been a small child at the Battle of Yavin and all this. I guess I just don't understand what it's this like idea where it's like, well, the war is over for us. Like, well, the war is not over for anybody, because we know that, you know, they have a mobile game or the entire sector, the Anoat sector, is completely cordoned off, and, you know, there's a hologrammatic AI version of the Emperor telling people to do X, Y, and Z. I think you'd need your best people. Yeah, I mean, and this is, I thought about this too. Well, I guess I hadn't thought about it in this term, but you know, and trying to connect Aftermath with The Force Awakens. You know, in Aftermath, Mon Mothma takes over the chancellorship of the Senate, and then she's like, yeah, and by the way, we're going to draw down our military pretty soon and pretty quickly. And so, you know, thinking about The Force Awakens and this idea of, you know, the Nazi imagery for the First Order, and thinking of them as, you know, the Nazis who went to South America, and you know, what if they kept going there, and then also just the idea that, you know, Leia and who knows who else works for a group called the Resistance. You know, maybe tying that into like the French Resistance in World War II. You know, maybe you know, this is kind of the story that they're building, that, you know, the rebel, you know, after the Battle of Endor, they just let people leave, you know, because, you know, they've been fighting for so long and so hard, and you know, Mon Mothma was like, yeah, we don't really need that big military, and that sort of contributed to, you know, the events that happened in Force Awakens. And so maybe it ties in that way. And yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but maybe that's
they're just trying to build that into the story of how they get to the Force Awakens, and that's how they're doing it.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I guess maybe they are setting the stage for like, it's the idea like, well, we thought the fire was out, but there was a few coals left, and
right. It's sort of like, I just thought of in Return of the Jedi when Han, pretends to be the Imperial guy, and he's trying to get them to open the doors to the shield generator. Like, it's over, General. The rebels are fleeing into the forest. We just need a few more troops to chase them and get them. It's maybe like, maybe that's sort of what the rebels think, but they really think that like, oh, it's we just need to chase down the last few remnants of the Imperials, but most of the hard work is done now, right? We took out the Emperor, and we took out Darth Vader. What, how much longer can the Empire hang on now? So the other I guess minor quibble that I have with this, and it could be again tying into something later on, is that the Darth Maul vision thing doesn't actually pay off in any way. And I looked it up. It is in the Princess Leia comic that they go to Naboo to find, refugees from Alderaan. And so I think that's where, like a painting or something of Amidala, like Leia sees the painting, like turn and look at her and smile at her or something.
Is it like a hologrammatic painting or something?
It might be, yeah.
Because I know that was a big thing, and if you watch the deleted scenes in Attack of the Clones, there's this whole sequence where Padme shows Anakin these pictures of people, and it's all three-dimensional hologrammatic pictures.
Yeah, but so she has this like sense. She senses Darth Maul in the hangar at Naboo, but then nothing happens with that. And so it could be that with that and with the Princess Leia comic, it could be that they're planting the seeds for someone else to tell the story of Leia kind of piecing everything together, learning more about her past and her family, her biological family. But it's just it's there, and it's a thing for people to go like, oh wow, she had this sense of this, she could sense Darth Maul, but then like nothing happened with it. It never paid off. And so I can hope that the payoff is coming later. I can assume that the payoff is coming later, but it didn't actually show up here.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't, and it's one of those that cross-pollination idea. Are things from Clone Wars going to reach out and make it into the comics? Are they going to go to Rebels? And I mean, right now, Darth Maul, where things are left, is still around. I mean, he has robotic legs, and which is great when people go like that. Like my wife doesn't really keep up on stuff, and she goes, "Wait, Darth Maul's alive?" I'm like, "Yeah, they used some kind of for some reason he didn't."
Oh, I hated that so much.
He's not dead.
Just come up with a new character. I don't know.
Yeah, it's that idea that it's like you could, when people would say, "Oh, I don't, Mace Windu's not dead because we only saw him fly," and it's like, yeah, I guess the cartoons could do something where they bring him back and he's got a missing hand and he's crazy or something. But yeah, it's it just goes. I mean, that's why you kind of wish they, I hope that the movies aren't necessarily going to worry too much about what's going on in the comic books. I mean, it's like, oh, we got a note from, the story group. We're going to have to change this costume because they've already done a costume like this in the comic. That kind of stuff. Hopefully people aren't going to sit around nitpicking it like that. I feel like the movie's the ultimate authority. And if all of a sudden it's like there's an idea, like some inference, like, oh, Princess Leia fought Darth Maul or something, they make some comment about it in the movie, and you're like, because I assume that stuff's that's why they're setting it up. At some point, Darth Maul is going to Of course, again, I guess he doesn't particularly have a an axe to grind with the Skywalkers necessarily. It's mostly Obi-Wan.
Right.
It's a mostly Obi-Wan Kenobi, so it might not even come to pass.
Right. So what did you think about that whole Force tree idea? And specifically, Luke got one, and then Poe Dameron's mother had one on Yavin 4. So I mean, what do you think about that as a way to set up more of it? Because this is Journey to the Force Awakens : Shattered Empire. So what did you think about that idea as setting up maybe part of the story for the Force Awakens?
It makes you wonder if Yavin is going to be a bigger factor in as we go on.
Mm-hmm.
It's just if this is such an important thing, and it's just like, I don't know, it's a weird idea that like, oh, I was only expecting one, there's two, you want one? It's like the idea like, well, how important is this thing then if you can just give one away?
Yeah, I assumed that was Luke's like sensing that she would take good care of it, and wanting to make sure that a piece of it survived if he didn't. But yeah, it's sort of like, oh yeah, sure, you can have it.
It's like, what if the Arthurian legend was, the Lady of the Lake? Oh, there's two Excaliburs. Like, do you want one?
Right.
I don't know if this thing is how immensely powerful it is, but he was looking for it, and there's always been that idea in the books that Luke restarted his Jedi Temple on Yavin, and that might be a kind of a doff of the cap to like, oh, this planet might come back again as being a place for Jedi to train. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what Skellig Michael is a stand-in for. I mean, I always thought of Yavin 4 being a jungle planet, or maybe it's going to show up and, maybe it'll just be a thing like in Rogue One. They'll just be like walking past it and they'll be like this kind of sparkly tree and they go, oh yeah, so-and-so planted that. Well, no, that doesn't make any sense. Oh my Lord. I've got my timelines effed up. I'm like,
that's all right.
I'm talking about something that would have taken place 30 years ago. It's like, oh, jeez. Yeah.
I mean, I think it does, right? For me, it just kind of adds to the sense that, yeah, Poe Dameron, we're not learning that much about him, and his role is even though he's not that old, but his role is maybe sort of the elder statesman to bring Rey and Finn into the fold and get them, fighting for a cause, and he's the one who can tell stories passed down from his parents and be the new sort of leader of the resistance, that next generation of leaders. That's sort of how I viewed it.
He's a lifer.
Being that, that I think that's sort of at a minimum. Now, the fact that he's apparently taken captive at some point in the movie, maybe that's related to his knowledge of where the Force tree is or not.
Oh.
Who knows? There are multiple possibilities with that now, but
that is a good possibility. Now I'm thinking about it. I mean, I have this issue where I keep thinking about The Force Awakens as almost like it's self-contained. And I never, in my mind, I'm not thinking about episode 8 and 9, really. It's this kind of thing where it just seems so nebulous. And so I don't realize, they're going to be setting stuff up that might take a whole nother 2 movies to resolve. It's like,
and that's, and I was thinking about that too, that, as you said, one of the reasons that A New Hope is your favorite of the movies is that it is self-contained. You have like a self-contained story. And I was thinking about that too, that even The Phantom Menace is essentially a self-contained story.
Yeah.
To the extent that there is much of a story there. It's, the movie ends and it doesn't really set up anything.
Except for the identity of the Sith.
Right. So yeah, I'm curious to see how much of whatever setup exposition we get in The Force Awakens will actually resolve by the end of it, or if it's going to essentially be a big to be continued which I hope it's not. I hope it stays relatively self-contained, but
right.
I guess we'll find out in 2 months or so, less than 2 months.
Exactly.
So let's move on to the Lando comic, which again has the story is over. The Lando comic is finished since we last discussed it. Where we left off, Lando and his team that involves an antiques expert and this pair of like clone twins or something that are super athlete
kitty cat twins.
Yeah. They stole the Emperor's ship. They didn't know it was the Emperor's ship when they stole it. But they're kind of trapped on this ship because there's this room full of Sith artifacts, and one of them looked into the eyes of a mask or something and went crazy. One of the twins, and so Lando and the antiques expert are kind of locked out of that part of it. Lobot got injured, so he's in a bacta tank inside. They're trying to get to Lobot, but at the same time, Palpatine then hires this bounty hunter to track them down. She has set this like self-destruct sequence on the ship, and it turns out that this bounty hunter is actually an old friend of Lando's, so that they know each other. And so I think it's been a while since we talked about it, but I think we'd already gotten up to like the last issue. And so in the final issue, Lando and Lobot and this bounty hunter make it off the ship. But Lobot's neural computer takes over for his personality. And so the like human side of him is lost, or at least buried, and it ends with Lobot sort of recording this message right before that happens. And it's this plea for Lando to reform his life and stop being such a rogue and to settle down. So there's this implication that this bounty hunter, Chaneth Shah, I think that's that's how I'll pronounce it, used to date Lobot, and he picked hanging out with Lando over her, which I thought was a little weird. But then also this is essentially then not the origin story, but at least backstory for The Empire Strikes Back, and the way that we see Lobot in that movie. It's because of this series of events that led him to be like essentially completely this neural computer and not any of much of the human personality. So I liked the art of Lando.
Yes.
We talked about the uneven facial renderings, but for the most part, I like the art. I certainly like the colors of it and the style. And this miniseries is really the only time so far in any of the comics that I really feel like things don't always go according to plan for people, which we've talked about already, so I won't go into it too much. But if you contrast this with the Princess Leia comic too, she got captured at the end, sort of on purpose, but it just kind of resolved. She got captured and then escaped essentially within the span of a single issue. So her being in danger, her being in trouble, wasn't ever really that much of a question again. Whereas here, this whole 4 out of these 5 issues is this thing didn't go to plan and they have to get themselves out of it. So that was sort of the other plot wise. That was the element I appreciated about Lando. Otherwise, it's just sort of this. All right, I guess it's interesting that he stole the Emperor's ship, but I can't imagine that's ever going to come up again.
And see, that's what I liked about it, because it was self-contained. There wasn't a lot of threads that left it out there, and it kind of I really like the art. Facial problems notwithstanding, it reminded me of, I had to look it up, the artist that did kind of similar, not exactly, because Cam Kennedy that did the Dark Empire series, which was a lot rougher, a lot more abstract, but although it was kind of in that same kind of wheelhouse, it reminded me very much of the 80s Marvel run, the post Empire pre-Jedi run, which was really when they really kind of got the Star Wars down, as I like to say it, because they knew that they couldn't have, Luke couldn't meet Darth Vader, he couldn't meet the Emperor, they couldn't find Han Solo, so it was just going to be a lot of like almost got him kind of situations. Boba Fett was used to a smaller extent in those comics, and it really kind of, except for one minor quibble on my part, I really think it kind of was a nice throwback to 30 years ago about how you would dance around a movie franchise but still tell a complete story. It's like you introduce very interesting characters on the understanding that they're probably not gonna, they probably won't make it to the end, or you'll probably never see them again. But they're still, it kind of adds to the prestige of a larger galaxy. It's like it doesn't have to mean, like that's the problem I'm having with like Shattered Empire. It doesn't always have to mean something. I like the fact that we've got a main character. I mean, my only quibble is that like if they're such good buddies, how come Lobot got left on Cloud City? Where is Lobot now? It's like he looks like he's hanging with Nine Numb now. I mean, there's a deleted.
Right. Well, and I think he shows up in Aftermath as still being on Cloud City, so he's trying to help rid Cloud City of the Imperial remnant. But yeah, he's not with Lando, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, they did that in the comic too, where like he would go back and Lobot had been like damaged in a fight with the Imperials. He'd gone insane, and like there's a great image of cover of Lobot punching, like double fist punching Lando and him flying over a railing and falling to, what is certain death or whatever. And then I think he writes himself. I forget exactly how he's saved, but it's. I mean, I like this because it just felt like, even though it didn't have any gravitas to it, it doesn't fit into. It's not the journey to the Force Awakens, because Lando's not going to be a part of that. But I just felt like it was a well-told story, and it's kind of like, honestly, if I really think about it, it's out of everything that they've done so far in the last 6 months, this is kind of probably my favorite, because it's, they're like they say, they're dealing in that sweet spot where they can tell a story and they're not going to spoil anything for the new movies, and they're not going to they only slightly reposition our general understanding of the Star Wars universe and how it works. And I essentially I thought it was a good. I mean, I guess I walked away from it liking it a lot more than Shattered Empire, even though Shattered Empire had a lot more weight to it. And a lot of that is to do. I didn't like Shattered Empire's art style. The bleach blonde Luke on the cover of that last thing. It's like, geez, this is what a miss on that. I guess the Lando characters I just really liked. Just like the whole idea that I could have done with a longer. It would have been nice if it had been like some 12 episode run where it's like, Lando trying to offload this ship and different people and nobody wanting to buy it. And eventually just having to blow it up or something. It's like, I would have liked to have gone a little longer, but
No, I take your point, and I think now I think about it, I'm probably closer to you. I do think that even though the story wasn't consequential, it was pretty well done. And like I said, I like the art and everything. The other thing that bugged me a little bit was this bounty hunter, Chaneth Chaw, and not her specifically, but like her gear. Like she had these rocket boots, and she was like, and her suit was basically like she was essentially Iron Man, but without like shooting lasers out of her hands, or I don't know what Iron Man does, but it was like, where she looked like the Rocketeer. She had these rocket boots. That part felt a little ridiculous to me. But that's sort of a minor thing. I mean,
I mean, I guess I walked into these comics expecting to be like kind of dazzled with a lot of information and being like, ooh, I kind of expected to be picking up the heir to the empire, the idea of like, oh, this is where things are at right now, and I just feel like, they're withholding a lot because they know they have a movie going, and you end up instead of like, great stories well told, you end up with a lot of great characters in inconsequential stories. And
well, that's, the thing about, I wondered at the end of Shattered Empire, when they made Shara Bay, or not at the end, but in Shattered Empire, when they made Shara Bay the personal pilot for Leia, I was like, well, what about that character Yvonne from the Leia? Yeah, from the Princess Leia miniseries. What happened to her? Like, she was an interesting character, I thought, and did stuff, and now it's, not that many years later in the timeline, and she's not around. So what's she up to?
Well, she's retired. They just let her go because
I guess
your mission's over. You can go home. Like, wait a second, I thought we were in a war.
Yeah. So but you're right. So then it's I guess that's what makes, I think, Lando a little more satisfying than the Princess Leia is. The Princess Leia is like, okay, you have some interesting characters, but like this story, like, I don't know what to do with this story. And they kind of like rushed through it, and they tried to cram too much in. And whereas Lando, like, there were only 5 issues, but I think maybe they did a little better with those 5 issues in terms of, not trying to put too much story in there. And so that the story they ended up telling, it was done a little more successfully. So the first issue of Chewbacca has come out as well. And that's also, it seems like it's going to be a similar idea to Lando, where it's sort of a not too consequential for, the broader Journey to the Force Awakens story, or even, the timeline of the original trilogy or anything like that. But Chewbacca is on some planet trying to repair his ship. He's by himself. His ship is like an A-wing scout fighter, like a shorter version of an A-wing, it looks like. You first meet him in this comic, and he's just kind of relaxing on this field of flowers. He's got his hands behind his head. He's just looking at the clouds. Meanwhile, there's a young girl on this planet whose father is being held as a slave in the local mine because he owed some local gangster some money. So the two, Chewbacca and this young girl, eventually interact in a casino where Chewbacca's playing sabacc, and he's pretty good, and he gives this girl his soup and, doesn't tell the Imperials that she's there. And then at the end, it turns out that the gangster has some kind of financial relationship with the Empire on that planet. But we don't yet know why it's important. So yeah, it seems like this story is just going to be Chewbacca kind of helping this young girl get her father out of slavery. Of course, he doesn't want to help her until she mentions the word slavery, and then he's all in. So yeah, the story in that sense is kind of slight in that it's not, we're not learning anything. We're not adding any new revelations or backstory or emotions to the story that we already know. This is just sort of, okay, here's sort of a few days in Chewbacca's life and a thing he did. I like it so far. I mean, there's only been one issue, so who knows how it'll end. But it's a similar kind of pastel, washed out, soft lighting look to what Lando. It's a different artist, but the color palette's not that different. And I think it's pretty well, like the layout and the way it's paneled. This is where my lack of knowledge about the proper terms to use with comic books comes in. But it's laid out well. The way the panels flow to tell the story, I think, is well done. And yeah, it's so I'm looking forward to where it goes from here. And I also appreciate that we're sort of seeing Chewbacca on his own rather than just as Han Solo's sidekick. Or, okay, he's there with Leia to protect her, but he's a proxy for Han or something. This is just, okay, Chewbacca, for whatever reason, just was on some mission by himself and was was stuck on this planet for a while and just was on his own. So I appreciate getting that look at the character.
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess my take on it is pretty similar to yours. I mean, Chewbacca's a hard character because he's not vocal in the way that we understand, but you got this little girl who's like, a sawed-off Lori Petty substitute, kind of, wiseacre. Mm-hmm. And I like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic that the next 4 things will have a pretty good story. Because like I said, I'm kind of predisposed to enjoying these kind of self-contained, like mostly about, the short version, I guess is what you're saying, is these stories are, instead of necessarily getting us greased up for the big Star Wars movies, it's reminding us why we like these characters.
Yeah.
And these are the qualities that they,
Mm-hmm. letting them essentially be themselves.
Yeah.
And maybe contributing to a broader character arc, like with Lando, you say, oh, okay, so maybe this is how he got to the point where he was the administrator of this mining facility in Bespin, but it's still sort of Lando being Lando in the ways that we like Lando being Lando.
Exactly. I mean, I guess that's all I really had to say about that one.
Yeah, there's only been one issue, so there's not much to say about that. I mean, I was listening to a different podcast, and they were complaining a little bit about how talkative the young girl is. That she was like kind of annoying. I mean, and I hadn't thought of that. I mean, I didn't really pick up on that as much when I was reading it, I guess, because my feeling was, okay, well, if you have this one character in Chewbacca who doesn't really speak, and they made the decision not to subtitle his dialogue, and so he speaks in Shriwook or whatever how you pronounce it. Right, so then to counterbalance that with a character, and even then when we see Chewbacca, like he's not constantly talking, he's quiet a lot of the time, and so to counterbalance that with a character who talks a lot, then it sort of seems like a natural sort of pairing. But then the other comparison I thought of was with Ahsoka when she first shows up in the Clone Wars, and how a lot of people's reaction was like, here's this annoying little girl who's going to show up, and what do you mean Anakin Skywalker has a Padawan?
Yeah,
she's so irritating. But that it was a show for kids, and there are kids who maybe saw themselves in Ahsoka and saw how people just underestimated her because they just saw her as annoying, but then it turned out that she really was good at what she did, and so maybe this is a similar idea where people, if there are younger kids reading this comic and they see the character, they're like, oh, she's like me, and she gets to help save the day, and she gets to hang out with Chewbacca or whatever, so yeah, I don't mind it that much because it's a comic book, right?
Yeah, comics are for kids. We always forget.
Well, that. even if they're not, it's like a comic book, right? It's just she talks a lot, which means they're just a bunch of words on the page. Like you can flip the page if you don't want to see her dialogue.
Yeah,
right? It's not like no one's like you don't have to sit there and listen and wait for her to finish in order to continue on with the thing. Like you can just turn the page if you want.
And I think I did, so it's kind of like one of those things where it's like I'll get the gist of it. I mean, she's just a little too talkative for my ear, but most that's why I kind of like the Lando. There was less dialogue than traditionally, except Lobot referencing his implants every 5 panels.
Yeah, once they got past the first issue, I think they scaled back on the dialogue. So then the last 2 comics that are out are Star Wars and Darth Vader. Of course, these 2 are going to meet up eventually as part of the Vader Down crossover event. But that isn't for a couple more weeks, I don't think. And so they're still on these parallel but separate paths. And so in Star Wars, Luke is now on Nar Shaddaa. He wasn't really captured by a Hutt, Gracchus the Hutt. But he sort of was, or he's more or less being held hostage, and he's being trained to be a gladiator to fight for Gracchus the Hutt, and he's being promised like, oh, Gracchus has this room full of old Jedi artifacts and old holocrons and old, lightsabers, and so it's sort of seductive for Luke. Chewbacca is sent to rescue him. Meanwhile, Dengar then gets involved to bring in the bounty on Chewbacca, and that's sort of broad strokes. That's Luke's storyline. So there's a Luke storyline and there's the Han and Leia storyline, and so that's the Luke storyline. So Gracchus the Hutt, he doesn't really walk or slither or crawl along the way other Hutts does. He has these like mechanical spidery legs, but then he also has these ridiculous hulked out arms that just look they just look ridiculous to me. Like I can't take it. Like why would he need arms like that? I don't get it. And then also the person training Luke is called the Game Master, which is it's such like a Game Master. There's only one Game Master I recognize, and that's Captain N. Otherwise, calling someone the Game Master, it's like, such a generic like sci-fi fantasy, almost like cliche. It's just it's what you call someone when you can't think of a name, and it sounds so sinister, the Game Master. No. See, it's not sinister at all.
That's almost like, again, that's like a throwback to the old Marvel Star Wars,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it definitely feels that way because, I mean, I could envision, like some kind of TV show, a science fiction TV show where the characters are like thrown into an alternate dimension and it's like this, they're put into a maze or in like it's a chessboard or something, and it's it's being controlled by this evil dimensional being called the Game Master. And they have to win the game in order to escape and go back to their regular dimension, right? Like that name, calling a character the Game Master, like that's what it feels like to me, which is a very kind of older style.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'd be down with that. Honestly,
yeah,
I'd be down with. I love the way that they used to try to even back in the 70s, they try to ape the Magnificent Seven or Assault on Precinct 13. That kind of those ideas of just keep recycling these same plots. But now I don't have it in front of me. Is there an implication that Luke will be fighting a Rancor?
That I think so. I think that so he was going to be this gladiator, and he was about to fight like Gracchus the Hutt's most prized possession or whatever. And I think it was we saw like a shadow of it or something, and I think it looked like a Rancor to me.
Again, this falls in that realm of why are they doing this kind of thing? It's the idea that Luke fought Boba Fett, but he was blind when he did it. Or, right. It's like, Luke's fought a Rancor in a gladiator pit on Nar Shaddaa, 6 years before he did.
But the difference is that he had a lightsaber then, and he doesn't in Return of the Jedi.
So that's the thing is why he looks like he's surprised when the thing comes out. It's more of like, I don't have a lightsaber and I've fought this thing before.
Right.
I will say a quick diversion back to Shattered Empire. I guess we've established that Luke did retain his green constructed lightsaber because he's got it. Obviously, there's some question that he chucked it at the end of Jedi and that he actually doesn't have a lightsaber, but I guess he does.
Yeah, I hadn't put that together, but you're right. I guess so if Luke's lightsaber. So Luke's lightsaber probably isn't the MacGuffin. Then it would be, Anakin's old lightsaber, or that was lost on Bespin or something.
Right? Yeah. No, it's not. It's definitely the lightsaber that gets handed.
But I guess so. He should still have his green, unless he loses it sometime between Shattered Empire and
that is true.
Force Awakens.
It's 30 years of backstories.
So then Han and Leia are still on, I can't remember the name of the planet, with Sana, who alleges to be Han's wife. The Imperials have showed up, so they're trying to escape. Leia finds out that Luke is on Nar Shaddaa, and so she cuts a deal with Sana where if Sana takes them to Nar Shaddaa to rescue Luke, then she gets Han. Han gets to go with Sana. And, so she still says she's Sana Solo. There's a reference to them getting married on a planet called Stennis, but Han denies it. I don't know. They're very slowly crawling through that story because they don't want to, they need to keep this character around to keep the mystery of like, is she really Han Solo's wife? Even though they pretty much imply that no, she's not at this point. So there's not really that much going on with that storyline in the last issue or two.
Yeah, I read that. I mean, we had prepared for this several weeks ago, and it doesn't, except for the small little things, there's not a lot that I remember from it, to be honest. Yeah. It's not.
No. I mean, what I described was basically it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not picking up a lot of
stuff. The one thing I will say is that I still don't love the design of Sana's ship. First of all, the way it looks essentially like if you chopped off the front half of the Millennium Falcon and then just took like a cockpit in the middle of it, sticking out. So you have this sort of like long, thin sort of, if you took the Millennium Falcon's cockpit, but then immediately behind the cockpit, you have this like half moon of a ship. And it just seems like they were trying to, say, oh, well, this is just a slightly different design by the people who made the Millennium Falcon. It's still a Corellian, Y series freighter, or, it's a Corellian freighter. But it's not the same kind of freighter. It's a slightly different Corellian freighter. But it's like this weird uncanny valley thing where it just looks odd to me, like the design of it. Like it doesn't look enough like the Falcon or different enough from the Falcon for me. Like I wish they had gone more of one direction or the other rather than this weird middle ground.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. They have so many options and then they just kind of pick something that's like similar to something that already exists, and
and I think they did something similar in Rebels with the Ghost. I mean, the Ghost it's a similar shape to the Millennium Falcon, and so I think it's the same idea. Like, okay, it's like a freighter, or it's maybe designed by the same people, but it's just a slightly different model, and that I think works a little better. But this ship, and then the name of this ship is the Volt Cobra, which I think is awful.
Terrible.
Like it's just terrible. The Volt Cobra.
Yeah, it's like they're running out of ideas or something, which they shouldn't be.
Yeah. So that's the Star Wars title. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
I didn't really have anything else on that.
All right. So then Darth Vader. So where we last left off with the Darth Vader comic, he was tasked with investigating a series of crimes for which he was responsible. Right. So he's trying to build up his personal army to win power back and win power back in the eyes of the Emperor, but then also find out who it was that blew up the Death Star and shot him out of the sky. And he finds out it's his son. And so he hears that it might be someone named Skywalker. And so he's still trying to investigate that. So in order to build his personal army, he and Afra and these two evil droids, they essentially robbed for the Empire, other parts of the Empire. And so he has been put in charge of investigating these crimes that he was responsible for. So it's basically an exercise in, conducting this investigation and then executing the witnesses before they can say anything incriminating about him in front of the other officer assigned to help him investigate this. So that's where he is. So he's with this guy named Thanoth, Inspector Thanoth, I think, he has a monocle, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah, he's old school central casting from as if they did their central casting from English Equity in 1975.
Right. Except he's black. Except he's black, so he wouldn't. Yeah, I think so.
Sometimes the skin tone changes. So I'll say he's much darker skinned than any of the Imperial
we see in the movies.
Yeah,
so.
I will say that my first thing was, oh, he's a dark skinned man, and then it's like they change it, and then I wasn't sure, so that's why I never even mentioned it.
Yeah. So while Vader's doing that, Aphra and the two evil droids are actually on Naboo, interrogating the guy who prepared Padme Amidala's body for burial, where they learn or they confirm that she had a son who the Jedi then spirited away. So again, Vader doesn't find out about his daughter until Return of the Jedi. So at this point, he thinks he just had a son. And so we start getting some backstory on Aphra here, which I didn't think was that interesting. It seemed kind of perfunctory, but give her some backstory. And then from there, Aphra and the droids they find some guy named the Auntie, who he looks like a guy wearing a Scream mask. From the movie Scream. Like, he looks like a guy wearing the mask, but that's just his regular face. He then tells Aphra pays him, and so he tells her where Luke is, or whether that's true or not, I'm not sure, because it's not, he doesn't say Nar Shaddaa, and so I'm not sure whether this comic is taking place at the same time as the Star Wars comic, in which case that information would be incorrect, or whether the timeline is like slightly off so that it is correct when the Auntie says it, just not what we're seeing now. Vader and Thanos show up because they find out about the Auntie, and Vader prevents Thanos from capturing Aphra, but just barely, and he makes it look like an accident. And he also uses the Force to have a stormtrooper like shoot the Auntie and make it look like an accident. So as I said before, this story is going to converge with the Star Wars title and this Vader Down crossover. It's still not clear to me how that's going to happen, because the Vader Down story is that he is behind enemy lines. Like, he's isolated on the rebel side of the galaxy or something, and he has to fight his way back to the Imperial side, which is not where they are now currently. Apparently, it's been in motion. This storyline has been in motion from the very beginning, with this idea of Vader trying to find the pilot who destroyed the Death Star. But, at Comic-Con, Marvel said that Vader essentially finds a big group of rebels by accident, and he's just kind of by himself. One thing that might be interesting is going back to the Shattered Empire comic, is that, Leia says, like, oh, I was here a few years ago after Yavin, referring to, when she was picking up referring to the Princess Leia comic, but it could be that they end up on Naboo as well. It could. I don't know if it's Nar Shaddaa, if that's where he finds this big group of rebels by accident. If Luke's there and Chewie's there and Leia and Han are about to converge there, and who knows who they bring with them. So it's still not clear to me, like, where that will happen, and how many new locations they're going to go to before we get to that point. And then the only other thing I'd say is that, I guess I made this general statement of like, oh, it feels like everything goes according to plan, and we're never in any danger. But in Darth Vader, I do get a pretty good sense of, like, at least the walls closing in on Vader. Thanos' investigation is like getting closer and closer to Vader. He sees Aphra and is now, I assume, going to try to figure out who she is and track her down. And so you do get this sense that, like, Thanos is basically right on Vader's heels, and it's everything Vader can do just to, like, keep him from finding out for, like, another day. And so I appreciate that sense. And then I think the art and the layouts and everything are really good on that's probably, like I said, if Shattered Empire isn't my favorite, it's probably this one.
Yeah, it's got a lot of good, it's kind of got that weird House of Cards kind of thing where it's like, duplicity and people working behind the scenes and, surprise murders. And I do like that aspect. This the Aphra character is kind of like, I don't know. I don't really know what my I don't have a problem per se. It's just like I just find it sometimes kind of slows the action down. Or just she does a lot of the exposition or whatever. I'd like to know more about why we're supposed to care about this person, but
she sort of says like, oh, my dad ran out on us, and my mother and I just kind of did whatever. It was.
I forget.
It was all crammed into like one speech and one panel, and
it's like Vader.
Who knows how much of that was true or not, or
I don't really care.
Yeah,
your family problems are your own.
Yeah,
that's what I would expect from Vader.
Yeah,
I will say that sometimes I do get a little confused by the action in this comic. Sometimes I feel like I have to go back and re-look at some of the panels. Like I'm not entirely sure where we're at some point, but that might just be because I'm old.
I mean, I think there have been a couple of times where I've had to do that. I know that definitely happened in the Star Wars comic with the fight between Luke and Boba Fett, and I guess here where Vader like used the Force to get a stormtrooper to shoot the I had to like look a couple times and say like, so what angle is this coming out of, and how is this, what's happening, and who shot that guy just now? And so that I think could have been done maybe a little more effectively. So
we've been going kind of long. Do we want to hold off?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. And the short stories, like I said, I've read the short stories, but we can save that for next week. Okay. There's nothing pressing about those.
So I think I said this before, but to reiterate, you can reach out and send us an email at talkingbirdcast@gmail.com. You can interact with us on Twitter at Talking Birdcast. I think I haven't really done anything.
Yeah,
with have you worked on the Tumblr?
No, but I'm going to.
Okay.
Since we talked about Rebels, I have more stuff to post, visual stuff to post. And
so Talking Bird Star Wars.tumblr.com, and go ahead, and we got a lot of stuff forthcoming. I don't think there's anything else. Everybody have a safe Halloween. If you guys are music fans, one of my favorite bands is playing on the Stephen Colbert Show on Friday.
Oh yeah, who's that?
Ghost, which they're a Swedish group. I guess the easiest way is they are a theatrical melodic hard rock band. I just saw them last week after we did our marathon trailer episode. I went and saw them at a terribly undersized, overbooked club here in Seattle, which was the Facebook people were complaining about it. It was pretty. I mean, it was stuffed. I mean, I was pushed up. I haven't been into a show like that since I was a kid. It was like, you had no room to move, and this band usually has like a lot of smoke and theatrics. They wear costumes with obscured vision, and it was kind of like it was a travail for the band and for us. But it was a good show, and hopefully they'll be providing something nice and scary on Stephen Colbert this Friday.
Yeah.
So if you
sounds good,
the kind of stuff I'm into. For Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
And I remain John Llewellyn.
Goodbye.
Ow! 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 Ow!